The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest stories in the NBA.
I at least got exactly what I wanted out of Sunday's All-Star game.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast.
I'll tell you what, Andy, my highlight of All-Star weekend came, what was it, around 3:30 or so, when we learned that LeBron wasn't going to play. Because in year 22, I am far more concerned about anything that might keep him from being able to finish the season healthy, particularly with the Lakers looking like they might have something to play for now going into the spring. If his ankle and his foot's feeling a little squishy, sit down. I do not need to watch him play the All-Star game. The league doesn't need it. Nobody needs it. I was super excited to see that he wasn't playing, other than, I guess, residual concern that he might be injured.
That's what I was going to say. I am only about 90% of the way with you, 80 to 90%. I get what you are saying conceptually. However, the whole reason he's not playing isn't because, for pragmatic reasons, even if LeBron was perfectly healthy, there's really no reason that somebody who's 40, season 22, should be in this game at all. There was a tangible reason he was sitting out. The ankle that keeps causing him periodic problems this season and connected to issues over the last few seasons was acting up. Like, that does put a bit of a damper on the excitement or pleasure that you were experiencing from this. And I do think it is worth acknowledging LeBron didn't just make a decision because he came to Jesus and realized, like, what the hell are we doing? This was, I don't think I can get through it, or I could get through it, but I'm really worried about how I feel the next few days.
I think it's much more the latter. Like, I could do this. Like,
I'm sure
if this was,
if the All-Star game was a playoff game, I'm sure he'd
be playing.
It would mean more people would watch.
I shouldn't be doing this. I don't need to be doing this. Doing this is counterproductive to the larger goal.
Yes.
We'll get deeper into some of this stuff and just, the reaction to the format. But like, when you talk about the All-Star game generally, one of the things I think that de-emphasizes it for players is the fact that nobody cares about All-Star games. I mean, Laker fans are obviously have great memories of Kobe's All-Star MVP games and stuff like that. But broadly speaking, nobody cares or remembers anything about All-Star games. And this is what all that matters is how far you go in the playoffs and whatever. If you're somebody in the league, the count the rings culture is such that, okay, if all that matters are titles, then everybody who's, Anthony Edwards apparently had a bad groin and sat out. Like, nobody should play in this game if they're feeling, because we're just going to bleep on them as a basketball culture if they don't win titles or they get hurt. And nobody's going to be like, you know what, but Anthony Edwards or LeBron played in that All-Star game when they were feeling a little under the weather. Well,
this is also the push-pull that comes with the idea of what is good for the league. And, it would be great for the league if we'll get into some of the formatting and whatnot in the All-Star weekend in general. But obviously, in a vacuum, it would be great for the league if the All-Star weekend carried a lot of cachet. But what really is great for the league is when the playoffs are awesome for multiple rounds. And it means much more, forget just to LeBron and his legacy and to the Lakers, it means more to the league when guys like LeBron are playing in the playoffs. It also, too, and this is something no owner will ever admit publicly, but I guarantee they all think privately, they care much more about their players being available for the playoffs when they're paying these guys anywhere from 30 to 50 to 60 or whatever $1 million a season. You commit to those guys because you want them available in the postseason. Frankly, none of these owners, if you gave them truth serum, gives a rat's ass if their players are in this event because they know nobody remembers. And then in the meantime, LeBron in providing the explanation, said that he, quote, was hoping it being his ankle would feel a lot better this morning, but it is not where I wanted it to be. With 30 games left and us trying to make a playoff push in the wild, wild west, it felt like it was very important for me to take care of myself and understand what's coming, down the stretch. The only thing I guess I would be critical of towards LeBron, if at all, would be if he's wondered for a few days whether, because I imagine LeBron takes, similar to Kobe, similar to Jordan, guys before him, takes his stature seriously.
Well, he said this is just staggering statistic here for a moment. First All-Star game since 2004 that LeBron didn't play.
Right.
First since 2004 that the man didn't play. And his reaction to that was, I hated it. Like the idea of him not playing. And he said, like, this was, this is a quote from LeBron. I won't say it's maintenance, but it is maintenance. At the same time, I have to look out for myself when it comes to this injury that I've been dealing with for years. And he's coming back and he's rehabbing in LA today. It's not a maintenance thing, but it's a maintenance thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how long he has been feeling about this, even understanding he feels a responsibility if he can to participate, it would have been nice to decide this with enough time for somebody like, say, Norm Powell, who I think was having an all-star caliber year for the Clippers. And this is likely, or quite possibly at the very least, Norm Powell's best shot at making an all-star team. So for someone like Norm Powell, it could have meant a lot to be a part of that game, because his likelihood of being this strongly in the running again is small. I remember when we covered the Kobe Powell teams, there was a year where it was the year that Lamar Odom ultimately won Sixth Man of the Year, but he was having such a strong year even off the bench that he was considered a dark horse candidate that year, 2011, to make an all-star team. And I remember you and I in particular very openly advocating for him, because we thought, A, he deserved it, but B, we recognized, and Lamar even talked about this, he isn't likely going to get another shot. And this means something to Lamar or a Norm Powell that's different to a guy like LeBron, even if LeBron, I'm sure, appreciates it. And that's why he waited this long to ultimately make a decision. That's maybe the only thing I would criticize of LeBron's, without knowing all of the details. Otherwise, 100% behind him.
Yeah. I mean, which thing is more important? I mean, you mentioned it before, but which thing is more, one is more important to the league. And I think it's fair to say that LeBron James, over the course of 20 plus years, has been a very strong advocate for the league. He has understood the bigger picture. He has seen, what is, nobody's perfect. There was this stuff about China a few years ago, but whatever. In the end, if the league could get every star in every generation to be as much of a team player for the promotion of the league as LeBron has been for the NBA, then they'd be thrilled. And so I think he probably figured he could get out there and do it and whatever, and woke up on Sunday and it was like, but you're right. But this, talk about this after,
mildly critical.
Mildly. And I think this is another thing where the league ought to be able to need more players on this team. It's I understand they have injury replacements. I understand in a normal format with a normal game, it is hard to get 15 players in and make it look like a real game. But at the same time,
it's the least of the format's problems.
Right. And it's baseball gets through this with the All-Star game, and it's kind of dumb, but everybody plays and it's whatever. They need to make the rosters bigger, and there should be a little more consideration for guys like Norm Powell, because ultimately there are legacy stars that make it because that's what people want to see. And both things can be true at the same time, which is the problem with all-star games.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. Imagine going to the big game this Sunday. That's what a lot of the people around me here on Radio Row are going to do, and the fans who are coming to New Orleans. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have time searching. Inspiration makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and take the work on ticket. Gametime. Download Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
What I think the playoff rotation should look like.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
What are both the ideal and worrisome possible first and second round playoff matchups for the Cleveland Cavaliers? So this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, because as we get closer to the playoffs, obviously these things start to just have a little bit, you can see it a little bit clearer, right? Like we're starting to know, I think we have a pretty good idea of who the top 6 teams in the East are. Not to say Orlando and Detroit can't flip places, or maybe Miami gets up to 6, although I don't necessarily see it with that group. I just kind of think that the top 6 in the East is going to be Cleveland, Boston, New York, in that order, in the top 3, and then some order of Indy, Milwaukee, and Detroit, 4, 5, and 6. After that, obviously with the play-in, we don't know how those teams are going to shake out until we actually see the play-in games, but it's going to be 4 of these 5 teams, I think, between Orlando, Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, and Philly, if Philly ever gets their act together, if they decide, hey, we even want to be in the play-in, because I do think it actually makes a ton of sense for them to shut Joel Embiid down and have surgery and have him miss the rest of the season and just tank. But that's not what we care about. What we care about is the best and worst possible first-round matchups for the Cavs. So in the first round, if we're going off that group of 5 teams, Orlando, Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, Philly, I don't know that there's a team that is necessarily that qualifies as worrisome. I mean, we're talking about a Cavs team that, in my opinion, will win more than 60 games this year. They're one of the best offensive teams ever in the history of basketball. They are, I think, going to take some steps forward on the defensive end of the floor. I just don't think that there's a team in that group that can beat the Cavs 4 times in 7 games. Could some maybe give them more of a test than others? Are some places maybe a little bit more difficult historically for the Cavs to play? Sure, but I don't know that any of those teams strike me as worrisome. If I have to pick the one that I would probably, if I'm the Cavs, want to play the least, it's probably Orlando, just because I do think Orlando at its peak is a very physical team, right? And they look much different when they have all 3 of their guys in terms of Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs out there. They've only had that, I think, for like 6 games this year. So we don't exactly have a feel for who Orlando actually is because of the injuries that they have. But I do think when they're fully healthy, and who knows if that'll be the case when April rolls around, but I think that they are a team that is going to be very physical, and that might not be a long series because I just don't see how Orlando could keep up with the Cavs offensively. I just think that that's going to be a matchup where the Cavs are going to find a way to score 115, 120 points against everybody consistently because they're that good on that end of the floor. But I think that that could be one that's just a little bit more of a physically taxing matchup than the Cavs would like to have in the first round. I don't think there's any danger of them not winning that series, but I think you look at it and say, man, you know, I just the bumps and bruises that will come along with playoff action. I think Orlando is probably a team that's more capable at causing them than the rest of those teams. Like if the Cavs played the Miami Heat, I don't think that'd be a very long series. If the Cavs played the Atlanta Hawks, especially with how the Hawks are now, I don't think that would be a very long series. There would be some storylines, certainly, but I don't think that would be a long series. If the Cavs played the Bulls, I don't think that would be a very long series. Could the Sixers win a game or two because they've got Joel Embiid if he's healthy? Sure, but I don't anticipate that being the case. So out of that group, I think Orlando is probably the team that you look at and say, yeah, I don't know if I would love to play them in the first round, but no one in that group says, yeah, they have a real chance at upsetting the Cavs. And then you move on to the second round, which I believe is going to be one of Indiana, Milwaukee, or Detroit. And of that group, I don't think any of those teams, I would not pick any of those teams to beat the Cavs, but I look at Milwaukee as a team that I think the Cavs actually match up against really, really well. I think that the Cavs, the way the roster is structured for the Cavs, having Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, having some real explosiveness in the backcourt. I don't know how Milwaukee would defend the Cavs. I think they would have some serious issues doing that. But they also have the best player in that series. And that's the only team in this group that you look at and say, yeah, that they've got a guy. Because they've got Giannis. So they're probably the one that I would term worrisome of that group. I would pick the Cavs to win a 7-game series against the Bucks because everything outside of Giannis and Damian Lillard is really good too, but the rest of that roster just isn't all that great. I would pick them to win, but that's probably a little bit more worrisome just because of the Giannis factor. And then you look at Indiana and Detroit. I'm very curious to see what Detroit looks like. I think Detroit could be kind of similar to what Orlando was last year, and I think Detroit is really actually very similar to what the Cavs were the year before Donovan Mitchell arrived, which should surprise nobody considering who the head coach is. I would probably pick Detroit as the easiest matchup for the Cavs in the second round. Indiana has played really good basketball lately. They've got some length, which some people do say bothers the Cavs. I think there's something to that, but I think that's probably not going to be as relevant now that the Cavs have made the trade for DeAndre Hunter. So I think that if you had to pick there, Milwaukee's the team you don't want to see only because they have Giannis. If they didn't have Giannis, Milwaukee would be the easy answer. Like, that's who you would want to play because they're just not all that good. But because of Giannis, you don't want to see them. And then between Indiana and Detroit, probably Detroit, because this Indiana team also too, you have to think about, they've been there before. They've been to a conference finals. They have underwhelmed this year as they're 30-23 at the break, but that's not bad. And they have been playing really good basketball for the last month and a half or so, really since the calendar flipped from 2024 to 2025. I forgot what year it was. Since then, the Pacers have been really good. They've been one of the best teams in basketball. So I think of those three options, you would probably pick Detroit first and have Milwaukee as the team you least want to see. But that's only because they have Giannis. But thank you, Frosho, for the question. Up next, the one ball knower. What do you think playoff rotation is going to look like? So I think that Kenny Atkinson is obviously going to have some decisions to make when the playoffs roll around if the Cavs are fully healthy. And I do think that the trade that the front office made for DeAndre Hunter made some of those decisions maybe a little bit easier for Kenny, just because I think if we're looking at the roster before the trade, I'm not all that sure that George Niang would have been in a playoff rotation or could have stayed on the floor in all of these playoff series. And this isn't to say that what the playoff rotation is in the first round is going to be the same as what the playoff rotation looks like in the Eastern Conference Finals against Boston, because I think there's a lot of wiggle room there where things could change. But the way I look at it as in the first round, I think Kenny's still going to try and play 10 guys, but it's going to depend on how guys 9 and 10 are playing. So the core 4, obviously, those 4 are going to play. One of DeAndre Hunter or Max Strus, I think, is the 5th starter. Both of those guys will obviously be in the rotation. So that gets you to 6. If Dean Wade is healthy, he's going to play. That puts you at 7. Ty Jerome puts you at 8. And then you've got Sam Merrill and Isaac Okoro. And I think that the ideal rotation length in the playoffs early on is probably 9. As you get deeper, it's probably 8. And it's going to depend, at least the way I view it, it's going to depend on how are Sam and Isaac Okoro shooting. If Isaac Okoro returns from this shoulder injury and is shooting the basketball the same way he shot the basketball before he got hurt, he's a no-brainer to be in that postseason rotation because he is such a great defender. He was shooting 48% from 3. You're not going to have someone that's a plus defender shooting that well from beyond the arc. Even if it's not on a high volume, you're not going to have someone like that not playing every night. So if he's that guy, he's going to play. Sam Merrill, conversely, maybe not as good of a defender as Isaac, I think it's fair to say. Certainly profiles as a better shooter, has more offensive gravity than Isaac does, is going to be defended by opponents very closely, but hasn't performed for the most part this season at the level that we know he's capable of. Now, he's been much better in February, and if he continues to shoot the basketball the way he's been shooting the basketball for the past couple of weeks, the rest of the season, then he's a no-brainer. I would not be surprised if game 1, Cavs first, whoever wins the second play-in game, if 10 guys play. I would be surprised if Jalen Tyson's in the rotation. I would be surprised if Craig Porter Jr. is in the rotation. But I think that's probably the 10, and you see it get whittled down to where, I don't know if there's room for both Sam Merrill and Isaac Okoro at some point. I think it could make sense to see Ty Jerome's minutes cut the deeper we get into the postseason, not because he's not playing well, but because Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland will start playing heavier minutes the deeper we go, which is a very important thing to think about too. It's kind of, where is the overlap in skill sets on the roster? And I just think that's what it's going to look like. But as we get deeper into I think the playoff rotation in round 1 is going to look different than what the playoff rotation looks like in round 3 and potentially round 4 as well. And those are the things that I do think that we have to think about. So the Cavs, as we know, made a trade a couple of weeks ago. They added DeAndre Hunter, and a added benefit to that was slipping under the luxury tax.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. Imagine going to the big game this Sunday. That's what a lot of the people around me here on Radio Row are going to do, and the fans who are coming to New Orleans. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have time searching. Inspiration makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and take the work on tickets. Gametime. Download Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
What are some dream NBA playoff matchups that could unfold?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The trade deadline's over. We saw the biggest trade in NBA history and everything in between, including some teams not make a move at all, including Oklahoma City stayed pat, but they did get Chet back. You saw Memphis just do some salary shredding. You saw Houston not go get that go-to score that we all think that they're missing. So with the dust settling, and even Denver stayed put, with the dust settling, let's rank our top 10 threats to Oklahoma City, who's the number 1 seed overall, by 8 games at the All-Star break. Let's do this from number 1 to number 10. Who is your biggest threat to Oklahoma City as it stands right now?
Maybe it's just the boogeyman in the closet, but I still have the Mavericks to a degree because I still think they bring a lot of the same similar problems in a matchup with this Thunder team. Obviously, they're not going to have the same level of firepower offensively that they had with Luka Doncic, but Anthony Davis is a matchup problem in his own right, and defensively, they're just going to go up an entirely new level that they haven't really been able to go. I mean, Derek Lively is going to look even better defensively, so I think that would be the number 1 team for me, but I can see arguments for other teams, but maybe it's a psychological thing with this team. It's a variety of stuff, but I think that they would still be, for the emotions, psychological aspects, and sort of just how these teams guard each other, would be the toughest one for me.
Yeah, so I totally see that point, and the Mavericks are higher up on my list than they are in the NBA standings. It's just such brutal luck for them this year to date. I mean, they did create bad luck by trading away Luka Doncic, but even after that trade, if they were fully healthy and you knew that they were going to have Lively back, and you knew they were going to have AD back, and you knew they were going to have Gafford back, they would still be the toughest test for the Thunder, I think. But whenever AD, his injury status is in question, you have Gafford now out for 6 weeks, still have Lively on the shelf. This is going to be a tough task for Kyrie Irving to pull off. Now, he can pull it off. He's that good. But he's also dealing with injuries and playing through injuries in his own right. And the reason they got pushed out of the 1 spot for me is because there's too many variables. And we saw even last year, like heading into the play-in tournament last year, the Pelicans had Zion playing really good basketball, and he gets hurt in the play-in tournament, and it goes from what would have been, I still think, a Thunder win in round 1 over the Pelicans to a sweep. And it's like they only had 1 game where you felt like the Thunder could lose whenever they had the shot from CJ at the buzzer. But like, it was a really uncompetitive 4-game sweep, all things considered. I think if Zion would have played, it would have been a little bit different. The Thunder still would have won the series, but a much tougher task. It's the same thing with Dallas. It's like, not only can they navigate this rest of the season post All-Star break, and for the rest of this pod, we're going to call it the second half of the year, even though for you math nerds, it's not truly the next 41 games. But for the second half of the season, like, they have to navigate injury issues just to make the play-in, and then hopefully they're healthy at the play-in, and hopefully in the play-in they don't suffer an injury en route. So there's so many variables that I can't put them number 1 personally, but I totally see the philosophy behind, hey, if this is a fully healthy Mavs team that is an 8 seed who who otherwise wouldn't have been an 8 seed. It's an overseeded 8 seed, if you will. I'm totally with you. It's just that those variables push them down. And for me, number one is the Denver Nuggets, because the Nuggets, yes, they lack true, bottom half of the roster depth. Not very important when it comes to the playoffs, not very important at all. And throughout NBA history, typically the best player in the world is able to win you some series and is able to drag you further than you should be, at least a round or two further than you should be. And they have the best player in the world. I mean, we can discuss the MVP stuff every week from now on. We won't do it this pod, but they have the best player in the world flat out. And they have the parts around him. I don't know how we've gotten to a point where we're discounting Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, who just dropped 50. Like, those are really high-level role players. Those are massive guys to put around Jokic, and they've done it. They have the experience. They've won championships together, and I just think that they're the biggest threat to the Thunder, and I imagine they're still pretty high on your list.
Yeah, I had him number 2, number 1, just sort of splitting hairs, coin flip here, but all the reasons you mentioned, Jokic is the best player in the world. He can win you 2 or 3 games by himself. He's playing incredibly well right now. And then the other point is Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray are really hitting their stride, looking more like the guys we've seen them in the past, like sort of that finals run they had a few years ago. So if they are like those types of players, then they're incredibly dangerous. Aaron Gordon's an incredibly versatile player who I really like. I still think that they're going to have matchup problems guarding Shea, but you talk about a team with home court advantage, like I think the elevation thing is no joke, and I think that's something that could really, really factor into a playoff series. And you talk about a young Thunder team that doesn't have as many playoff scars as a lot of their competition. Denver has all of them and more, and they have like a lot of hunger for kind of getting back into this, because a lot of people think that their title run was a fluke. They've got some extra motivation with a guy like Russell Westbrook on their roster. So I think that would be an incredibly interesting series, and I also have it number 2.
So then my number 3 team is Dallas. And so we talked about Dallas, so I'll let you have the floor for number 3.
Yeah, number 3, I had the Lakers. Maybe it's once again just the boogeyman of not really seeing them yet, but I think that they wouldn't really have a great chance of guarding the Thunder in like transition opportunities, and I think that there would be some different matchups of not really being able to guard Shea between playing Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves for that many minutes. But you talk about the supercomputer minds and the NBA playoffs, where it really, really turns into a half-court possession game of just your turn, my turn, of just dueling back and forth. Those are the two or three best guys in the entire world, and if you can put 48 minutes of those guys on the floor with just above-average role players, I think they're super, super dangerous. I'd still pick the Thunder to beat them in a series, but those guys specifically, I'm just always going to have a hard time counting out.
So I do have Denver and Dallas 1 and 3. I did skip over my second team, which is LA. It's the Lakers version of LA, because they're number 2 for all the reasons that you've said, with Luka, LeBron. I mean, come on. Like, I think the Thunder are uniquely positioned to slow down the Lakers as much as you possibly can. But even so, they're going to be a just juggernaut offensively, and you've got to keep pace as the Thunder with still gambling on role players who I think are better than they were a year ago, who I think that will shoot better than they did a year ago, but they haven't proven it yet. So you're still banking on that. Where I think that the Thunder would have the advantage against LA is LA's center rotation, because while I do respect Dorian Finney-Smith, and I do respect Vando, and I do respect Gabe, I think that they have really good Shea perimeter defenders, as they proved last year. Last year, though, all that length and size was a detriment to Shea, because you were funneling him in from that to AD. Jackson Hayes, not exactly the same defensive threat. So I think that you've neutered yourself a little bit when it comes to getting past Oklahoma City without a center trade, which obviously they tried to make the Mark Williams thing. It didn't work out for them. But still, because of their offensive firepower, it's number 2. So for me, Nuggets, Lakers, Mavericks is my top 3. Number 4, I think, is interesting. I don't want to see if we have the same number 4, because like the top 3, pretty cut and dry for us. But number 4,
I put the Warriors. It's another one of those sort of psychological matchups. I would have had the Warriors at the very bottom before this Jimmy Butler trade, but I think he makes things extremely interesting, and we've seen this Thunder team not exactly thrive in sort of these mud fight games, and you play against Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler and a team as experienced as the Warriors, now adding another more experienced guy like Jimmy Butler. I think that it's going to be extremely hard to knock a team like that out. And so I would still pick the Thunder to win that one, but we've seen some weird things like the Warriors. They've been 2 of the Thunder's losses this year, I'm pretty sure, and just a weird, difficult matchup, and just a team that has all the psychological advantage in terms of like playoff scars and things like that.
So I totally agree with the Warriors being a massive threat. They're in my top 5. They are number 5 because you're banking on the Jimmy Butler effect and the Draymond Green effect, 2 guys who I think really can. For one, Jimmy Butler's an all-time playoff riser, frankly. No matter what you think about him off the court, or what you think about him as a personality, he's an all-time playoff riser.
I'm so sorry.
That's incredible.
I was trying to unmute myself.
No matter what you think about Jimmy Butler as a personality, like he is incredible come playoff time. We know that stuff can get hot at a moment's notice, regardless of how great and historic your defense is. And then Draymond, he can get under your skin, clearly, in the postseason. Plus, you do have the cross-country flight. It's a very raucous environment. So I have them number 5. My number 4 team is the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it's interesting because it would fully depend on what you believe Chris Finch will do in the playoffs. If you can promise me Chris Finch is willing to play Randall off the floor, and you promise me that he's willing to give you a heavy dose of Naz Reid as a lone big out there, then that's why I have the Wolves so high. Now, if he goes against all this and he doesn't prepare for this individual matchup and just plays his top guys because, hey, they're our top guys, we're paying them, we got to play them, that they're our respected reputation, rotation, then you've lost me. But if I think that Finch, much like Mark, would throw that stuff out and just game plan for the matchup in front of him. And the Minnesota Timberwolves are a unique matchup for the Thunder and can make the Thunder a jump shooting team. And that's the big question about the Thunder right now. It's like, perhaps it could backfire on Minnesota and that like Wiggins and Kaysen and Caruso and all these guys can take turns getting hot. Sure. But if they don't, and if that's still a red flag for Oklahoma City, that outside shooting, and they're packing the paint with one of the best rim protectors we've ever seen, man, it could get dicey for Oklahoma City. So I have them in my top 5. I have them at number 4 with Golden State at 5. So we've covered my top 5. Who's in your 5?
I have the Memphis Grizzlies. I'll probably touch on the Wolves later. I didn't have them in my top 5. The Grizzlies, I just like their depth. I like their experience. And I think they're a more stable team and reliable team than the Wolves. I think the Wolves are pretty volatile. And the Grizzlies, like, if they get some good John Morant games, which I don't think would happen against the Thunder, they can be pretty dangerous. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. is a really unique matchup for this Thunder team in terms of, like, he can go guard the perimeter on some of these threes for Chet and guys like that, but also protect the rim. He's a floor spacer in his own right, so he can take Chet or Hartenstein away from the rim. But in the end, like, we saw them the Thunder just blow him out without Chet the other day, and I think it would come down once again to sort of the depth of the other players. But guys like Desmond Bane are still really, really playing well. I think it's less about, I think the Grizzlies are really, really great. It's more just looking at the rest of the field, and I have a lot more skepticism around them.